Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're happy to have you. Feel free and write in the chat box. Let us know where you're joining from. We'll give everyone a couple minutes to come join us. Minnesota, awesome.
Hey,
I'm Rachel from Canada. So is my husband.
Oh, good. Good to have you guys. After you guys, if you say hi in the chat box or if you say hi, just make sure and mute yourself afterwards so we don't get some back noise.
I have to mute myself. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Doha, Mexico City, Austin, California, Boston. Awesome to have you guys. We've got all kinds of time zones. Hawaii. Thanks for joining us. Another Texan. In Canada, awesome to have you. In Nashville. San Antonio, I love seeing everyone come in. This is great. We'll just give everyone another minute or two. We have a few more people filtering into the room. Denver, Colorado. Hopefully this summertime is really beautiful there. I lived in Denver for a little bit. Such a great place. Another London, Maryland. From Belgium, I'm also in Europe right now. And England. All right, well, we'll go ahead and just start introducing ourselves. So I'm Ashley with Traverse Journeys, and I am here with Ryan, who will be hosting this together on Iceland. We're really excited to have you guys. I'll let Ryan introduce himself. He's calling in from Iceland. I'm actually in Denmark for this call.
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, my name is Ryan. I'm currently in sunny Iceland, and hopefully we'll be going through a nice journey of what the future trip to Iceland with Traverse is going to be like today. It's going to be fun.
Sorry, Ryan, can you say that one more time? There was a little bit of back noise.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So my name is Ryan. I'm one of the local tour operators, one of the expert guides in the country, and I'm going to be taking you guys on a journey, hopefully to Iceland for real, but certainly remotely today or virtually. And yeah, hopefully you'll get a chance to see what makes Iceland so special.
Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of information on Traverse, so some of you may be familiar and maybe have traveled with us before, but we do small group trips in about 20 countries across the globe. Of course, you know, all of us are a lot of us are grounded right now. There's some travel that you can do as maybe a European. Americans are doing a lot of domestic and staycations, but we're really excited that you could join us for all of our destinations and all of the fabulous partners that we have around the world. And just to give you a little bit of background of how we structure the experiences that we do, we have a lot of people-to-people interaction. We really love to get to know the culture that you're visiting, really understand what drives the communities, what are important to them. And so those experiences are really integral to the itineraries that we put together. And then, of course, the planets. We do a lot of nature-based itineraries. We go hiking, we go to really gorgeous places, and we also look for sustainability and environmental impact. So how can we have the lightest footprint that we can? And Ryan will talk a little bit about that and what they do in Iceland. And then purpose. So in each location that we go to, we partner with a nonprofit or NGO community partner. Some examples here have to do with ocean conservation in Croatia. We work with the Berber Women's Textile Co-op in Morocco, Quechua language preservation in Peru. So there's lots of experiences that you get to have to, again, understand what's really important to that community, and a portion of the trip sales goes to that partner. So without further ado, we'll start talking about Iceland. I'm going to pass it over to Ryan.
Okay, yeah, so welcome to Iceland, or virtually at the very least, hopefully in reality in the future. The one thing that I want to say before I talk about Iceland specifically is the nickname that we have for the country, and that is the land of fire and ice. You may have heard that, or it may ring a bell in Game of Thrones or something, but the reality is Iceland is a volcanic island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, And over the last 15 million years, we've had constant volcanic eruptions over and over and over and over again to create this tiny little island in the Atlantic. Over this period of time, we also have had lots of cooling periods, heating periods, cooling periods, heating periods that have created lots of glaciation as well. So although Iceland has lots of volcanoes, ironically, there's also lots and lots of glaciers too. So that's why we call the country the land of fire and ice. So when you come to Iceland, hopefully you'll see both, well, you will see both. So the second slide, geography and climate. The first thing I'll talk about is the population of the country. So the size of Iceland is about the same size as England, maybe slightly smaller, but the population is a fraction. So about 365,000 people live here compared to 65 million people living in England. So when we talk about crowds, when we talk about domestic tourism, when we talk about squeezing into the same crowded spots, Iceland doesn't have that because there's just not that many people there, which is great. And about 2/3 of those people live in Reykjavik, the capital city. So the second we get away from the city, we're talking about villages and small towns across the entire country, which is pretty great. In terms of the location of the country, it's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, between the 64th and the 66th latitude. So that means that Iceland is right on the edge of the Arctic Circle. So in the middle of summer, that means the sun doesn't set, and in the middle of winter, you only have a few hours of daylight. So whether you're coming in spring or fall, it can have a really big impact on what you see and how Iceland appears. The one thing that people often think, considering that Iceland is called Iceland, is that it's really, really cold. I assume you probably all think you're going to need a lot of layers when you come to Iceland, and that's kind of the case, but we have a thing called the Gulf Stream that sends warm water up from the Gulf of Mexico and warms the waters around the country, meaning that despite it being right next to the Arctic Circle, it's a lot warmer. So the average temperature in winter, for example, is around 0 to 3 degrees Celsius. So in American terms, that's 34 to 36 Fahrenheit. Compare that to places in Alaska and Canada, and it's definitely a lot warmer than you'd imagine. So you get that Arctic feeling without that sub-zero temperature, which is great. In terms of the people who live in Iceland, the country was settled firstly in 874 AD by exiled Vikings. So you probably think that all the people living in Iceland are really scary and aggressive, and actually sometimes they do come across as that sometimes, but it's just the language barrier. In Iceland, there's no word for please, or not a word that you would use for please, but they're actually the most friendly people I've ever met. Over the centuries, they've actually been very lucky to have a very peaceful existence because nobody really wants to go to a country called Iceland in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So just sincerely, because they're away from everywhere else, they've never really been invaded properly. Yes, they've been owned or ruled over by other Scandinavian countries, but it's more of a union rather than an invasion. When you come to Iceland, I'll talk more about the only successful invasion of Iceland, and that was actually by the British in 1940 during the Second World War, but no shots were fired, and they actually have a really good relationship now. So Iceland has remained very peaceful ever since. And one of the other really interesting facts that you'll learn about Iceland is it has the longest surviving parliament in the world. So in 930 AD, all the Icelandic clans came together and said, okay, we need to come up with a set of rules that will govern the country. Some form of parliamentary system that will allow us to keep the peace and trade successfully. And they've kept it going ever since. So 930 AD, all the way up to now. So when we're talking about a peaceful nation, Iceland is definitely right up there. So let's get the negatives or maybe the positives actually out of the way. We're going to talk about the coronavirus. So I know that the rest of the world right now is having its ups and downs, and depending on which country you're in, there's second waves and resurgences. However, in Iceland, they've done an incredible job of holding on and not having any new cases. So in total, Iceland have had just under 2,000 cases. And the last time we had more than 10 cases reported in any one day was back in April. We've had no resurgences. So that's led Iceland to basically open their borders again. But it's a little bit different from other countries because Iceland, knowing that they are almost virus-free completely now, don't want to see a resurgence. So if you're coming from any other country in the world, the first thing you're going to have to do is take a test at the airport. That test lasts for literally 5 seconds, 5 whole seconds, where they stick a little swab right in your nose. It's probably one of the least fun things I've ever had to do, but it only lasts a few seconds. And then after 5 hours, you get the test results back. So you're probably immediately thinking, does that mean I have to wait at the airport during that time? And the answer is no. You can actually leave the airport, go to your hotel, and even walk around Reykjavik, the main capital city, without having any restrictions whatsoever. So when you finally enter Iceland and you're reported with no virus, then it will feel just like it did maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago. The big difference between Iceland now and Iceland, let's say before the coronavirus, is that the tourists have disappeared. So maybe some of you have heard that Iceland is overcrowded or was overcrowded. However, I would argue that it's never the case because there's very little domestic tourism in Iceland. And there was only about 2 million people who visited the country every year. Compare that to Venice, that has 20 million in a much smaller area. And I would say that places we would go would never be crowded. However, due to the coronavirus, the maximum number of people that can enter the country on any given day is 2,000 people, which is actually not that many considering half of those are reportedly locals returning home. So when you come to Iceland, the place is going to be empty. And as a glacier guide, as a local guide, as someone who goes around the country, what I would say is that is absolutely fantastic. So the fact that, when we start running trips again and bringing people over, they still don't expect a huge uprise of numbers. They think it'll still be a really small number because of those maximum per day. And, we've gone to the most celebrated parts of the country without anyone else around, which I think is pretty great. I'm just going to read a couple of notes here because it's very specific about the coronavirus. And then I'll take a pause for a second because I know you guys might want to ask a couple of questions. So since the 15th of July, or as of 2 days ago or 3 days ago, Iceland has tested 43,000 people coming into the country. And out of those 43,000 people, only 13 have tested positive for the virus, which is a really, really tiny number. Luckily, we have a tracing app. So of those 13 people, they were found very, very quickly, and they were told to self-isolate until they could do a second test to find out if their case was active and if they were having any symptoms. And so because of that, because it's been so successful, they're starting to see which countries where people are coming from where there is literally no new cases. So as of a few days ago, they've started to add countries to what they call the safe list. So countries where you don't need to even do the test anymore, which is really good because then there's no chance of you being quarantined when you arrive. Before it was only Greenland and the Faroe Islands. Now we have Denmark, Germany, Finland, and Norway being added to that list, which is pretty good. Anyone from inside the European Union can come, and then there's 14 other nations outside of the European Union and the Schengen area that can also come to Iceland by taking a test. I'm going to read them out to you now, and then I'll just pause for a second just to see if you have any questions about that. So the countries that are currently okay to come to Iceland are Canada, Australia, Japan, Thailand, South Africa, Morocco, New Zealand, Rwanda, Tunisia, and Uruguay. They've just recently taken off Serbia and Montenegro. And the reason they've taken them off is because there's been a resurgence in the last couple of days. Every 2 weeks, they'll either add new countries to that list or they'll take countries away. So if you didn't hear your country at that exact moment when I spoke, it doesn't mean 2 weeks from now or a month from now or 6 weeks from now, you won't be added. Because the only thing you need in order to be added to that safe list for the European Union is to have your average number of cases either the same or below the European average, and to have a 2 week trend of the cases going down or being stable. So that's the only thing that you need for a country to be added. So I know a lot of you are from the United States at the moment. I'm not saying that 2 weeks from now US is going to be added to that list, but if the coronavirus cases start to reduce over the next couple of weeks, then we can start to expect something to happen, hopefully very soon. So I rattled on for a little bit there about the coronavirus. I just want to pause in case anyone's asked any questions at the side that I can answer about that in reference to Iceland.
Does anyone have any questions specifically about COVID? I know we kind of went into detail, but lots of people have wondered. We are going to be talking about flights also, because that was some of the questions that came up when you signed up for the event. So we'll talk about like what airlines are flying in as well. But any questions about COVID specifically?
I do. So if I understand you right, the US isn't on that list, and we're not likely to be on it anytime soon because our cases are not plateauing, unfortunately. So does that mean this year we won't be able to come when you have the trip in October, or that we'll come and be tested and have to leave if we're positive?
That's a good question. So let's pretend that the trip was tomorrow. You wouldn't be able to fly to Iceland unless you had an essential reason to fly. So if that trip in October was happening today, then anyone from the US would not be able to come. However, every 2 weeks, they're reevaluating the list. And at that point, then the US may be added to it. So it's actually irrelevant as to whether or not you're being tested. So the testing is done by Iceland. It's an Iceland-specific measure. Whereas the list of safe countries is a European Union and Schengen measure. So it's kind of weird, because some people are saying that because Iceland are doing testing on the border, it shouldn't matter which country you're from. However, Iceland want to adhere to European and Schengen rules, even though they don't necessarily need to. So the hope, I guess, is that 2 weeks from now, the number of cases will start to drop in America. And then 2 weeks after that, even further. And if it gets to the point where the average number of cases is low enough to match the European Union, then yeah, the US will be added and you'll be able to come. So hopefully October trip will be fine for people from the US. But today I would say it's not physically possible. I don't know if you agree with that, Ashley.
Yeah, and just to add on to that too, that's a really great question. So, I mean, we're of course really hopeful for October that like if you were from Europe, for example, you could join our October test because other Europeans can enter Iceland. But right at the moment, US Americans cannot. However, those guidelines from the EU, the country itself can decide whether they want to follow that. Like Iceland has chosen to do that, but an example of Croatia is actually permitting US Americans to come in. They have some guidelines and I believe testing as well that you have to do. So it's worth staying on top of it. And we also will keep everyone informed as things change. Like, so if you were to sign up for the October trip with us, for example, we have a flexible booking policy. So if Americans could not travel on the October trip, you would go on our spring or another 2021 date with no fees. We would just transfer you over. But of course, we hope to be able to run the trips this fall. So we're staying on top of it. We keep you informed as we get information, and you're always welcome to reach out to us with questions. So another question that came in, so one of the questions from Rachel, do we think it'll die down in 2021? I really wish I had an answer, and all I can say is I sure hope so. Ryan, can you remind me, is Canada on the list that's permitted to into Iceland?
Yes, Canada, Australia, Japan, Thailand, South Korea, Algeria, Georgia, Morocco, New Zealand, Rwanda, Tunisia, and Uruguay, and then all of the European nations.
Yeah, and so Germany, you're European, so correct. You could go to Iceland, and Ryan, you said Europeans do not need to be tested at the border, or sorry, Scandinavians do not need to, but a German would need to take the test, correct?
No, actually. So the countries that can go to Iceland at any time and not be tested are Denmark, Germany, Norway, and Finland. So they don't even need to do a test. And if you're from Greenland or the Faroe Islands, but those populations are quite small, so we don't expect that many people from there.
And it's a lot to remember. I'll send the list to everyone. JVM, you asked about that also. I'll send the list to everyone in the follow-up email so you can check your specific country. And then if it's still not clear, you can always just email and we'll answer your case. So, all right. So let's talk about the itinerary, the fun part.
All right. So
I'll pass it over to Ryan.
Thank you. Okay, so as you can see from that little map, we actually cover quite a large section of Iceland on our 8-day trip. If you remember earlier, I said Iceland is about 3/4 the size of England. So when we're going all the way from the southwest of the country to the southeast, back again into the interior of the island, and then a big loop of the west, and then back towards Reykjavik, and we're actually covering quite a lot in a short space of time. One of the great things about Iceland, and you'll see as we go through the slides, there's quite a lot of stuff to do in very small sections. So there might be one day where we focus on glaciers, another day where we focus on waterfalls and short hikes, another day we would focus on the landscape or volcanoes, and each day we'll, even though we're in the same volcanic island, will feel almost like a different trip, I hope, or I know really. So if we move on to the next section, some of the highlights of the trip. To me, okay, so actually just a little bit of background on me. I'm in Iceland because I am a glacier guide. I hike on glaciers, I go into ice caves, I discover cracks and holes, and I basically am a big geek when it comes to anything that involves ice. So I'm in the perfect country, really. So I always say that my favorite part of the trip is the adventure day where we go hiking on a glacier. If anyone's a little bit scared of going into the unknown or into the adventure side, it is actually designed on glaciers or get into that terrain before. As long as you have a general fitness level and your ability to move your knees and your ankles properly, then you can definitely get involved in that. You don't have to, but that's something that we like to do. Kira, did you have something to say? Oh, no, okay. So yeah, we'll move on a little bit. I won't talk about the highlights too much because I'll cover them in a second anyway. So there's two options for you in terms of coming to Iceland. You can either come in May or spring, or in October, which is fall. Now we're going to go to very similar places for both trips, but the experience will be quite different in some cases. So if you come in May, as the summer is approaching, you're going to experience we call it the midnight sun, but basically 24 hours of daylight. I mean, for example, now it's the 18th of July and I haven't seen stars for a very long time. So you have blackout curtains in your hotels, so don't worry about that. But one of the great things about it is you can wander around outside of your hotel with sheep walking around, with the sun still high in the sky or fairly low by midnight, and just experience a sunset at one moment. And then maybe an hour later, if you're willing to stay up that late, you can watch the sun rise again. So it'll drop below a volcano in the distance and then rise above again. So that's one of the big positives of spring. It's also the time when about 10 million puffins fly to the country. It's also a time when whales start to migrate and mate off the coast. It's a time when all of the lambs and all of the sheep are released from their pens and their farms. And when I say released, I mean released into the wild, into the distance. So you'll be driving along the roads, going for a hike, and sheep will be running straight past you on the road. It's actually kind of a weird time of year because they believe that nature is more than abundant for these sheep to eat things for 6 months. So that's something to behold. And then if you come in October, it's a little bit colder because it's October. It's still not freezing temperature. The big difference is that you've got a lot more nighttime, so maybe 12 hours of darkness instead of 0 during May. And 12 hours of you searching for the northern lights is a pretty big deal. You still get a chance to sleep and see the aurora, which can be any color: green, pink, purple, even yellow at times. I don't know if anyone's seen the northern lights, but it's more elusive than people think. So if you come in October, don't expect to definitely see it. But if you're here for 8 days and you're spending the majority of the time out in the wilderness, which we are, i.e. away from the cities, then we're going to have as good a chance as any to see the aurora. And then the other thing we'll do during that time is we'll go horseback riding. You can do that in spring as well, but it's better in the fall when you've got snow around. So those are the
We
main.
just had one question, Ryan. I'm going to chime in about summer, which if it's a good time to travel. The only reason we didn't have a summer, we chose spring and fall itineraries, is because we often try and travel on shoulder seasons to avoid like over tourism. Of course, now with Corona, things might change a little bit as like travel shifts, but summer is certainly still a great time, to travel in Iceland as well. And we have another question, Ryan, just about like average temperatures, maybe spring, summer, fall.
Yeah, good. So the average, I'll do winter as well. So winter, the average temperature is between 0 and 3 degrees Celsius, which is about 32 to 36. By May, the temperature rises quite a lot. You're probably talking about 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, which is about 50 to 55. But you get days where it goes up to 65, even in spring. In the summer, the average temperature is between 13 and 15 degrees Celsius, which is roughly 60 to 65. We get days where it goes up to 75 though, so you do get really, really hot days. And then by October, it's probably about 6 or 7 degrees Celsius, which is, what's that, maybe 45? And by the way, I'm just converting in my head for Fahrenheit for the people from America. I know the Celsius one, but the Fahrenheit, I'm just like, okay. Yes, that's the average. The one thing that you'll learn when you come to Iceland is that if you're here for 8 days, you'll probably experience blinding sun, blue skies, snow, rain, wind, everything you can imagine. You'll probably get at least a little bit of each one as we travel through the country. So don't expect the weather to be perfect, but don't expect the weather to be terrible either. They always say if you don't like the weather in Iceland, just wait 5 minutes and it'll probably change. So yeah, I would say it's cold, but not as cold as you would expect. So layers, and I'll talk about that later, but layers and waterproofs and things like that help a lot. So the overall experience, before I go into the day by day, is going to be quite different from maybe your other holidays. I want your trip to be as unique as possible and as authentic as possible. And as local tour operators, the local guides, the one thing that we always say is, sure, you could go to buy a car or rent a car and travel around yourself, but you're only taking pictures of things at that point. If you go with someone who knows the area, a local guide, an expert, then you're getting this immersive experience where the guide will probably know the owner of the hotel, will probably introduce you to the local farmer, will have a degree in geology or glaciology, or we're physically there the last time a volcano erupted. And what we try and do when we're creating these experiences, both with myself and Ashley, is we want you to feel by the time you've left that you've not just experienced Iceland, but almost felt like you were a part of it. So when we go to a hotel, it's not necessarily the 5-star extravaganza. It's something where when you walk outside, you've got a glacier in the distance, or you're walking around with sheep around, with really comfortable, beautiful rooms, but in an area where you feel like you're experiencing local rural nature. And the food that you'll hopefully try when you're in Iceland will be local. It won't be something imported. I'll talk more about the food a little bit later on, but let's just say that whether you're a vegetarian, a vegan, or a meat eater, you will have food that you will consider memorable, let's say that. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the other thing I'll say before we go into the day by day is that people in Iceland care very, very deeply about nature. About 15 to 20% of the country is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is a big chunk. The local guides care deeply about where they're taking you, so we're going to make sure that we leave everything as it was when we arrived. And actually, between myself and Ashley, we have decided to offset all of your carbon emissions for when you travel to Iceland. So everything that you would maybe create when you're in the country, we've offset that, which is great. And that money goes towards planting trees, to investing in wind farms and various other initiatives around the world. So we like to give back a little bit as well. So that's kind of as a holistic. In terms of the day-to-day, oh yeah, sorry, I'll talk about the accommodation first. So I actually mentioned this just a second ago, but you can see from this picture, and then if you skip to the next couple of pictures as well, you'll see that the view, either whether it's the Northern Lights or mountains in the distance, are absolutely spectacular. So we won't say specifically which hotels we use because we do tend to pick them based on location and availability, of course. But this is a really good picture actually to show you. Even before the coronavirus, one of the things that I believe should be really important is how clean the place is. And everyone in Iceland agrees it'd be hard to find a hotel that's not perfectly clean and tidy and new, and actually has this modern Icelandic aesthetic where it's very minimalist, so not very decorated, but certainly very feng shui, I guess. But even now that we've had the coronavirus put in place, there's even more levels of cleanliness and disinfecting, and that would be the same for the vehicles that we drive as well. So we disinfect everything, and we're very careful with that. I think that's probably all I need to say about the accommodation, unless you guys have any questions. And then I'll move on to the day-to-day. Did we have any questions?
Chime in too. If anyone has any questions so far about the overall experience, I moved a little fast on the slides, but one other thing that we do are all small group trips. And I mean, we did that before. We've always been like 8 to 12 people. We like to keep it kind of small, but that's been just among times in Corona and travel, you know, people are more concerned about traveling in smaller groups, so less than exposure. And so that's something that you would have in the experience anyway. Plus, it's just a really great way to get to know your other fellow travelers and your guides. So it's a really great bonding experience if you haven't done a small group trip before. So just throwing that in there as well.
And I promise you'll get to know your guides so intimately that you'll consider them your best friend by the end. I get a lot of Facebook requests afterwards to become friends with people, and we have like pictures of things that kids have painted on the walls in our office, which is really nice. So hopefully you'll enjoy it with us. I'll move on to the day-to-day of the itinerary, and we'll swap between spring and fall, although there is a lot of similarities between the two, so it shouldn't be too much of a crossover. So the first day that you arrive, assuming that we're still doing tests for coronavirus, you'll arrive, you'll do the test at the airport, and then you'll travel directly to your hotel. As I said before, you're allowed to go out into the town. You're not restricted to your hotel room, but you are expected to social distance and be careful as much as possible. But the great thing about Reykjavik, I say this a lot, and you can maybe see from the pictures or just from Google, is that this is the capital city of the country. All the major industry is here. There's finance, there's tourism, there's museums. But as you're walking through the streets, it really does feel like a fishing village. A lot of the buildings are corrugated iron. They're painted fancy colors. Small streets. You'll have people sitting outside drinking coffee, and people just enjoying themselves by the pier. It will not feel like a capital city. So whether you want to spend your first day going to museums and learning about the science and getting 360-degree panoramic views at the top of the Hallgrímskirkja, anyone want to try and see them? The Hallgrímskirkja church, or you just want to like wander around, it will be a really good day for you to just kind of experience Iceland. And this will be probably the only time that you'll feel like you're in even a town, let alone a city. Because as I said, 2/3 of the population live in Reykjavik, and the next biggest city, and they do call them cities, is only 16,000 people, and that's in the north of the island. I think the biggest town that we'll interact with after that is about 4,000 people. So in terms of getting away from the crowds and avoiding potential infection things, the itinerary is pretty well set for that. One last thing I'll say about that before we move on is you may have all heard of the Blue Lagoon. It's a hot pool, really, really close to the airport. It's not part of the itinerary, but if you have a day in Reykjavik, whether it's on day one or at the end of the trip, you can book that, and there's just a short 40-minute bus journey to go and spend the day bathing in the hot pools of the Blue Lagoon. But on our itinerary, we will be going to other hot pools, so you don't necessarily need to actually, go to that if you don't want to. It's a little bit touristy, but it's touristy for a reason. It's amazing. Okay, so the next day, we're going to go southeast to a place called the Reykjanes Peninsula. which translates to the Smoky Peninsula. That's literally what it translates to. We'll be exiting, so let me actually explain it better. Iceland, I don't know if anyone's looking at me in the pictures, but Iceland is divided in two. You've got the North American tectonic plate and then the Eurasian tectonic plate. And every year, by about 1 inch, the country is moving away from each other. So as the thousands and millions of years continue, the ground literally cracks and breaks and opens up and either lets seawater pour in and makes the island smaller or break in half, or it allows lava to come out and make the country bigger from the inside out. So the Reykjanes Peninsula, a place right next to Reykjavik, is actually between those tectonic plates. So we're going to spend the first day looking at geothermal geysers. You can see from that picture the smoke coming out of the ground. That's natural. It's a little hot spring called Buna there. And we're going to drive past lava fields where the rocks are broken and sharp and multicolored because of oxidation. And then by the end of the day, we're going to go underground and we're going to see what it looks like when a volcano erupts and emits huge amounts of lava, and I mean hundreds of meters high levels of lava from 5,000 years ago, and what happens when it creates a cave underground. So basically the lava will cool down on top, and then the lava on the inside will continue out, and it creates these big long tubes. So day one, we're actually going to go underground and into a lava tunnel, which is a pretty good place to start. Day two, if you're coming, or day three, I guess, if you're coming in the spring, we're going to go along the south coast a little bit, and we're going to jump on a ferry for 30 minutes and go to the Westman Islands, a series of islands named after the Irish slaves that were first brought over with the Vikings in 874 AD. This island is incredible for the views. There are about 1.4 million puffins that fly to this island every springtime to mate. So the hope when we're there is that we'll see a few puffins on the cliffs, and they are the cutest things in the entire world. I assume you guys all agree. And you get fairly close to them, but you don't want to get too close because they're mating at the time, so you don't want to interrupt too much. The thing that I love about this island is actually the history, arguably the geology as well. But in 1973, if you can see that picture on the screen actually, to the far left of the island, there's a little cone shape sticking out, which is right next to where all the houses are. That was not there. That whole section of the island did not exist before 1973. So there was a volcanic eruption in 1973 that spewed out huge amounts of ash and tephra and lava that flowed directly towards the little town that people were living in. But because Icelanders are crazy, instead of running away, they decided to take seawater and start to spray the lava with seawater day after day. And instead of the lava pouring into the city or the town and destroying everything, they instead managed to cool it down so much that it created a barrier and redirected the lava out into the sea. So not only were they met with destruction, they managed to save their entire town because I guess they're used to volcanic eruptions, and they finally say, no, we can handle this. We understand how lava works, and we're going to save our little town and continue doing what we do after that, which is fishing. So when we go to that island, we'll get to learn a lot about that. If you guys are willing, we'll walk to the top of that volcano, and although it hasn't erupted since '73, you can actually still feel the warmth on the ground. If you put your hands into cracks, it's hot enough, like when a hairdryer is blowing on your hand, that's how hot it is. So it's pretty interesting. So that's what we'll do on that day. The next day, along the south coast, depending on the weather, whether we do the glacier hike that day or the day after, we don't know. But this is my favorite day, mainly because I'm obsessed with ice. There are over 400 glaciers in Iceland. But we pick the glaciers that, one, are easy to get onto, so you don't need to be a mountaineer to find them, but two, because they are the most beautiful. And the picture that you see on the left there is the Vatnajokul glacier, which translates to the falling glacier. And all those spiky blue things that you see in the distance there, that is effectively the glacier falling off the edge of a cliff slowly and moving down towards where that guy in the picture is called Scott. Is standing with his clients. And I maybe have made that sound very scary, but actually, in actual fact, it's a very safe environment as long as you're with the correct person, which would be one of the experienced glacier guides in the area. We would spend 3, maybe 4 hours walking on the ice, looking at cracks, holes, ice sculptures. We would talk about, sadly, we would talk about climate change and how it's making all of the glaciers disappear in Iceland. In fact, we've had more melting in the last 20 years than in the previous 150 years. So that's something we'll talk about in more detail on the ice. But every step of the way, you'll be wearing spikes, you'll have harnesses and helmets on. And for me to understand Iceland, you need to get on the ice. I think it's a really big difference between that and any other country. So yeah, that'll be what we do that day. The following day, we will spend the night in a much more secluded area in a little boutique guest house. And I want to focus on, well, what you can see there. It's called Jökulsárlón, which is the glacier lagoon in the Vatnajokul National Park. So basically, because of climate change and naturally occurring changes in the environment, glaciers will move forward and they'll retreat, forward, back, etc., etc. And as they disappear, they leave behind what we call a footprint, and that footprint will fill with water and create lagoons. This particular glacier has lost 5 miles of ice in the last 60 years, and instead there's this massive lagoon where ice from the glacier will break off or calve and float around inside this massive lagoon. So actually the iceberg you see in that picture probably only broke off, oh, good question, only broke off maybe a couple of days earlier. And then as the tide comes in and out from the sea, it'll crack the ice into lots of smaller pieces. And then it'll flow down onto the shores. And then we eventually will get to see the ice in its final resting place, which is broken bits of ice on the beach. I just saw a question about why the ice is blue. It's a really complicated question, but I'll give you the very abridged version if we're okay for time. The ice on a glacier is blue because, let me do the really short version. It starts off as snow. It gets compacted down by more snow over hundreds of years. And as the air gets pushed out and the snow gets compressed into ice, it creates a very structured lattice. That means that when light comes in, instead of just bouncing around and either coming back out or refracting, it actually absorbs most of the color from the light spectrum, and it's only the blue with its very fast wavelength that actually emits back out. So it's not that the ice is blue, it's more that it's trapping all of the other colors, and it's to do with the vibrations rather than the way the sky is blue. I hope that was succinct enough. So anyway, I love talking about ice. So after that, we've done 2 days of adventure. We'll have done short hikes on gorges as well and things like that. We want to take it a little bit easier. So we go to the Golden Circle, which I normally say is the most crowded part of the country, but because of the coronavirus, I suspect it will actually be pretty good in terms of number of people. But even then, we'll still try and avoid the midday crowds. So we start the day by going to the oldest hot pool in the country called the Secret Lagoon. You can see that picture on the left there. That is a best case scenario, but we do arrive there sometimes and there is absolutely nobody there. So we sit and we bathe in this hot pool with its regenerative powers for about an hour or so. And then we head to actually one of my favorite places called the Friedheimer Tomato Farm. And this is a place that utilizes the heat of the volcano, geothermal heat, to heat up a greenhouse so that they can grow tomatoes all year round. So even if you come in fall or if you come in the dead of winter, you'll still be surrounded by 21-foot high tomato plants that are growing all around you with bees buzzing around. So you get to eat food that is grown from the energy from a volcano, which I find quite interesting. And then the rest of the day, we'll see huge waterfalls, considered basically the mini Niagara Falls and erupting geysers and various other things. If you come in fall, we will go to an area called Húsafell, which is a very rural area, and we call it the Farmland Day, where we'll get to play with the Icelandic horses and actually get to ride them for a little while. So these horses that you see in front of you, they're very small, but I'm going to give you advice before you come. Absolutely do not call them ponies. A lot of people will be like, oh, they're small, just like ponies. but the Icelanders get really angry if you call them ponies. Basically, these horses have been living in Iceland for 1,000 years and have adapted to the cold, to the wind, and they get all fluffy and hairy in the winter, and they've got shorter and stockier, and they can sleep on the ground. They've done a really good job of adapting. So you get to ride them, and the way they ride is really, really flat and really, really nice riding. If anyone has ridden a horse before, it's like dum, 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 up and down, up and down. These horses always keep one foot or one hoof on the ground the whole time, so there's no bouncing up and down. So if anyone hasn't ridden a horse in Iceland before, it's quite a unique experience. And then we'll see other waterfalls that day and things. And then the final day, before we return to Reykjavik, is we like to call it mini Iceland, because we're going to be driving most of the day for the views, where we'll see active volcanoes, we'll see glaciers, we'll see broken sea cliffs that, believe it or not, we can walk along from that picture down on the right there. We'll go to black sand beaches, and we'll stop at lava fields where the rocks are all jagged and spiky. And people often say that this final day is where they get their best pictures, because this particular peninsula was created from 3 different volcanoes erupting from the ocean about 800,000 years ago. And because there was so much lava, they joined together and then joined onto mainland Europe. So everything is very new, geologically speaking. So everything is broken and cracked. There's basalt columns, there's angular rocks, and there's lots of things where it looks like it just happened. It looks like there was an eruption just the day before in certain areas. It's quite beautiful. So yeah, so that's as quick as I could, a nutshell of what we're going to do while you're in Iceland. I hope it sounds, I want to be Canadian. It sounds like a really good trip. In terms of the food, I don't know how many of you are vegetarians, vegans, love fish, love meat. But rather than elaborate on my favorite food, I'm actually just going to read a very quick list of some of the weird things that Icelanders eat, and some of the normal things as well. I hope that's okay. When I first arrived in Iceland, I was a meat eater, a big meat eater. I would eat anything that anyone was willing to put down in front of me. So that means, while I've been in Iceland, I've tried cod, salmon, and Arctic char, fairly normal. Mussels, fairly normal. I've also eaten reindeer. I don't know if anyone is okay with eating reindeer. I'm not a fan of eating whale, but they do serve whale, and they also even eat puffin in Iceland. My favorite one, however, is the rotten shark, hakarl, and that's basically a meat that you rot in the ground for 6 months, the Greenland shark. Allow it to ferment so that it's no longer poisonous, and then you eat it. I don't recommend it unless you want to have a lasting memory of smell and taste that is similar to the inside of your gym bag after quite a heavy workout. That's what I would say about that. So the meat side is kind of weird. But on the vegetarian side, I'm now a vegetarian. They grow things geothermally using the heat of the volcano. So basically, whether you come in spring, fall, winter, you're always going to be eating vegetables that were grown in Iceland. So the tomato farm that we go to grows 1 ton of tomatoes a day just from the heat of the volcano. They also grow, cucumbers and lettuce and other normal vegetables. But believe it or not, as of 2017, Iceland officially is able to grow bananas indoors. And it's the most northern banana plantation in the world. And they're able to grow coffee beans and cocoa beans. So it's not in mass production yet, but eventually you'll be able to have a hot chocolate, a coffee, and a banana smoothie from stuff that is grown in Iceland. So when we talk about self-sufficiency, Iceland is moving closer and closer towards that, which is quite interesting, I think. Short version, the food is fantastic. Okay, so I think that's it for the food.
Yeah, I was going to add in one more thing about the food too. As you can hear from what Ryan said, like everything is very, very local. So you'll get to experience not just like Icelandic food, but like in that area that we're in. And as he mentioned too, it's a really easy place to accommodate any diets. We get vegetarian or vegan or gluten-free. So if you have any limitations, we can do that. A couple questions came in too about like whale and some of that, and maybe questions about like the ethics of that, and that's something on the trip we can talk about more in detail, because there are a lot of layers to that discussion. So yes, if you're curious, that's a good one to talk about with your guide in Iceland too.
Absolutely, and it's actually a very contentious topic. You're right about the whales. What I will say, which is good news, and I agree that we shouldn't be eating whales. The main company that catches and kills whales in Iceland have not caught anything for the last 2 years, and the expectation is that they're probably not going to reopen again, which is pretty fantastic. So any whales that are caught in the past stands now, it would literally be for the locals in terms of surviving. But most Icelanders don't involve themselves in eating whales or puffins at this point. But yeah, it's something we'll talk a lot more about in person. And yeah, I don't even eat meat anymore. So whether it's whales or puffins or anything else, I don't. Yeah. But yeah, if you're vegetarian or vegan, yeah, there's a lot of options for you. Okay, cool. So a couple of tips from me. Whether you're coming in spring or whether you're coming in fall, I would say prepare for two things. Prepare for getting wet, potentially, and a little bit of wind. It's not necessarily going to rain or be windy, but you might as well attempt to cover all bases, because you'll get sunny, you'll get cloudy, you'll get rain, you'll get wind. So bring waterproof jacket and waterproof pants. If you don't want to bring them, we can provide them. However, it's always nice to bring your own. Rather than bringing like ski pants and ski jacket that's really thick, I would say bring something really light and thin, and then have lots and lots of layers, because you will get really warm at times and really cold. So putting on and off is definitely ideal. Wear gloves and wear a hat, mainly to stop you from feeling a bit chilly when it's windy. It's not that cold that it will affect you in any health reasons, but it's definitely cool enough to need them, especially if you're on the glacier. So hat and gloves are nice. In terms of the money situation, I'll give you an example of how much things cost. For 1,000 kroner, which is about $7 US, €6, or £5.50, you could probably get 2 coffees for that, or maybe a couple of hot dogs, a snack, really. So if you're going out for dinner on your own, if it's not included in the itinerary, then maybe £25 is probably a good guess for a main meal, if you want something really nice. So Iceland is expensive, but because of the coronavirus, actually, the exchange rate has fluctuated massively and brought the prices way down. In Canada, I know, in the UK and the US for sure. So it actually will be a little bit cheaper than normal when it comes to like buying souvenirs and things. In terms of cash or credit cards, I personally have not used cash in this country for the whole time I've been here, maybe once or twice. If you're in a service station, if you're in a restaurant, if you're going to the toilet, you can use your credit cards. So if you don't want to take out cash, that's fine. If you do prefer to work in cash, and if you want to tip people, then you can get money out at the airport when you arrive. You can exchange money from US dollars or whichever to krona, or you can just take it out of an ATM as well. I personally just use cards. It's not really a problem. I'm not going to talk too much about tipping, but in Iceland, tipping is not mandatory, but it's also not frowned upon either. So if you decide you want to tip someone, then that's fine, but it's not expected. You're not going to insult someone one way or the other. Ethical travel, I guess what I was saying before, in terms of our company, in terms of working with Traverse, we offset all of our emissions, but that's just one of the things that we do in order to maintain this beautiful country. We leave things as they were when we arrived. And one of the big components of our guides is they know a huge amount about one, climate change, and two, environmental impact. So often you'll end up having conversations about what you can do in your daily lives in order to help keep the environment safe. Things like bringing a bottle with you to the country and then using that bottle to fill up water from a local stream or a glacier or even the tap, because we're quite against plastic in this country, which is, I think most people will agree, is pretty good. And yeah, small groups, experienced locals, it's all good. Okay, so the two things I'm going to finish with, I believe, the two highlights, whether spring or fall, and that's obviously the Northern Lights and the midnight sun. It's hard to say which one I prefer because when you're in the midnight sun, it's warm, and when you're in the Northern Lights, it's potentially quite cold, but there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing, so you can take that for what it is. The Northern Lights in Iceland, when you come in fall, September, October time, are actually the most likely to see them. If you come in January or February or December, statistically speaking, according to the Icelandic Meteorological Service, you're far more likely to see them in September and October. Two reasons, mainly because the weather is a little bit better, so you need clear skies to see the Northern Lights. And then just statistically, and I'm not really sure why, there are more electrically charged particles hitting the angle that would come into the Icelandic atmosphere around that time of year. And when we do see the Northern Lights, sometimes it's just a whisper, a little speck, and you go, what's that? And then other times, like you see in the picture, it can be a massive dancing curtain of various lights. So I'm not going to say you will see the Northern Lights when you're in Iceland, but if you come in the fall, then we'll do everything we can to maximize your chances. And the same goes for the midnight sun. The sun will obviously come out every day and stay there the entire time except for a brief sunset. But it might be cloudy, so you might not see it exactly. But we do want to make sure that you're in areas where you will see and get a good view as the sun is coming down and going back up. So those are my two highlights on both occasions. Okay, so that's me. I've talked for hopefully not too long. I tried to get through as much as possible, so I apologize if I talked quickly. But yeah, this is now time for anyone to ask any questions. I know you might have quite a few.
Yeah, we have one question about airfare. We promised we'd talk about airlines. So we don't include airfare in the itinerary just because people come from all different places, have different preferences for their travel routes. A lot of times people will come a few days early or stay later. So we don't include that. However, Ryan, if you want to just go over the major airlines that fly into Iceland, especially kind of like right now with Corona happening.
Yeah, so I think there's 8 different airlines flying to Iceland right now. However, there are expected to be more, but Icelandair is of course the biggest one that comes to the country. And every time I look on their website, they're adding more and more and more destinations and frequency of destinations, which means that the price of the airfare will hopefully go down as more people are coming. There's also budget airlines like Wizz Air, Transavia, and EasyJet. They're flying to Iceland again. I believe Delta will start flying again soon. I'm not sure about that one. But the expectation, depending on where you're from, is that as the weeks continue, there will be more and more flights added. And the price from the last time I checked is roughly the same as it was before, if not slightly cheaper. So most countries that do direct flights have been flying and not been cancelling. I've been keeping an eye on it, so I wouldn't expect to book a flight and then them to cancel your flight. So if you're coming from Paris or Germany or Denmark or Boston or Toronto, it's unlikely that they'll cancel flights on you, which is good.
And so we have another question kind of going back to the clothes about waterproof versus just warm. Do you want to answer that? Like having gloves that are waterproof versus say warm wool gloves?
Yeah, waterproof gloves are definitely preferred. I mean, the thing is, if you get your gloves wet, then you almost don't need to wear them anymore. But the only time I would say gloves are a necessity is when we're on the glacier, and ice, depending on the temperature of the day, can be quite wet. So if you get your gloves wet, then you're going to have a pretty miserable time with wet hands. So I would say waterproof gloves if you can. If you can't, it's still okay. Nothing bad will happen. It just might reduce your happiness levels for a little while. So yeah, warm gloves are good.
And also, Ryan mentioned earlier, if you don't want to bring, I think it's like boots and pants yourself, you can rent them there. So yeah, so that's an option.
Yeah, we have really comfortable hiking shoes if you want to hire them instead. And then the pants and the jacket that we have, we intentionally keep them very thin. So it's only to stop you from getting wet. So your job is basically to bring as many layers as you can to make you feel comfortable with the temperature. And as I said, Iceland is not anywhere near as cold as you imagine. Even after I've told you the exact temperatures, people are still like, oh, well, maybe it's colder. But unless the wind is really strong that day, which can happen, you don't tend to feel that cold if you're wearing the right clothing.
And also, just a question on like what the cost is for those. Somebody, LaDonna is asking, like what rental costs ballpark are?
So it's 1,000 kroner to hire your jacket, pants, and boots for the entire time. So it's very cheap.
Yeah. And then also a little bit more on the puffins. So we talked about the Westman Islands, and we take a ferry to get to the islands, which is where you would see the puffins. And the question is more specifically about like seeing them from a boat, like with whale watching, or can you give a little more details for that question?
Yeah, so the puffins live on the cliffside. So you can either see them from below by boat, or you can see them from above by walking. What we will do as part of the itinerary is we will find places where you can see them in their natural habitat from walking. I would recommend if you're coming in spring but not fall, on the days when you're in Reykjavik, you could book onto quite an affordable whale and puffin tour. So they take you out on a boat for, I think it's 3 hours, where they'll look for whales, and at the same time they'll look for sea cliffs where you'll find puffins as well. So you can probably do both and still not feel like you've doubled up on seeing them. But yeah, if you come in spring, my expectation is that you'll see some puffins, hopefully close up at some point for sure.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you for all of the notes that you're sending. It's great to have you guys participate in these webinars, and I will also send a follow-up link. So in case you came late, you can listen to the whole thing, or if you want to spread the word with anyone else that missed it today, you can send that. I'll answer some of the top questions in the follow-up email as well. We do have a little special, and I'll include this in the email if you want to join us for next year. So hopefully things for travel will be a lot easier for next year. But there's still options in the fall for those that can travel, and we'll keep you posted as Corona hopefully improves globally. We really hope for that. A big thank you to Ryan today for being our local expert. He's so knowledgeable. We could talk about Iceland for another few hours, I'm sure, easily, or days at a time. So thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, and I sincerely hope that that things around the world start to improve and you get a chance to come and visit the country that I've fallen in love with, because whether you're interested in glaciers or volcanoes or horses or puffins or just incredible views or adventure, like we cover it all basically. So everyone leaves Iceland being touched or changed in some way or another. So fingers crossed, things will get better soon.
All right, well, I'm going to sign off now. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and feel free to reach out with any additional questions. Bye, guys.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much.